Great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the April 6th Recovery Task Order to order at 7 p.m., May 6th, 2021. And I'll start off first by taking the roll call for our Issaquah Recovery Task Force. So please unmute and say here when I call your name. Jason Boyce.
Here.
Thank you. Marisol Visser.
Here.
Marisol. Mike Brennan.
Here.
Thank you. I'm going to skip over Nina for now, but let me know if she enters the room. Pavel, are you here?
I'm here.
Good evening. Saikat Sen. Don't believe it's going to be here this evening. Trish Blur.
Here.
Hi, Trish. Don't believe we have Brookie Scholl this evening. Looking for Grace Chen. And I know Janine Sanders is excused for this evening. And Shashi Kulkarni.
Here.
Hi, Shashi.
Hi.
Also, Marlena Waxa. Hi, Marlene. I couldn't hear you. You want to try again? Nope. But I do know you're here, so we will figure out the microphone thing. Ron Fall?
Here.
Hi, Ron. And Stephanie, are you here this evening? Not seeing Stephanie. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have some staff participating in tonight's call. We have City Administrator Wally Bobkowitz. Finance Director Beth Goldberg is joining us by phone. Our Executive Assistant, Joanne Biscara, is with us, and David Mitchell is recording and televising us this evening. So welcome and thank you to all the community members who are joining us tonight as well, either to listen in or to add to our discussion this evening. Your engagement makes us better. You have all been promoted to panelist level of participation so that you may fully engage with your cameras on and the ability to mute and unmute and add yourself to our conversation. I'm wondering, Joanne, if you think I should go through the virtual format meeting guidelines. Has much changed for the task force? Because I do know our two visitors tonight are fairly familiar with our protocols.
Yes, no new protocols, just make comments in the chat.
Yeah, if you have any questions or problems, please write something in the chat and make sure you have the chat on all attendees or host and presenter, Joanne?
Yeah, either one.
Okay, so that you're sending your message to all of us, so I'll be able to see it. The first item we have on the agenda this evening is the approval of the minutes from March 11th. And so are there any objections to approving the March 11th minutes as presented in the agenda packet? And I will just look for a visual if somebody has an issue, not seeing one. So hearing none, the minutes are approved as presented. And Joanne, are we going to have public comment at the beginning of the meeting this evening? I have that on my agenda as well.
No one commented or wanted to make comments tonight. Okay. Yes.
Thanks very much. So we'll move into our main item this evening, which is the American Rescue Plan Act. And most of this evening will be City Administrator Bobkowitz giving you I'm going to get it right again, the America Rescue Plan Act 101 class, because the purpose of our meeting this evening is I am hoping to, well, I'll take a step back first. Last year when I pulled you together, I optimistically assumed we would be making a recovery plan within a few months of pulling you all together. And instead, you spent much of your time advising me on how to respond to the crisis. Well, we're turning a corner now, and we're entering a phase where we are going to talk about a recovery plan. And the federal government is providing cities direct funding this time, which did not happen in the earlier CARES Act package. We did receive some funding. You did help the city decide and the council decide how to allocate it, but that was given to us either through the county or through the state. In this round, the cities and other agencies will be receiving direct funding, and the city of Issaquah will be receiving $8.6 million to be spent over a 2-year period to cover some very specific areas of disaster assistance and investments in recovery. And why I have you all here this evening, which is not our normal meeting time, is this is the first touch we're having with community members and this panel here to present the information that we have and to ask you to think about those high-level priorities. So not a specific project or a specific item, but advice that you would give to council on how they should bucket out the money that they're getting. So in Wally's presentation, you will see that there is funding for many things like rental assistance and business assistance in other buckets of money that the feds have given to other agencies or jurisdictions. And then they've given some guidance to cities that said, this is what we would like you to spend your money on. And that's what Wally is going to go through this evening. Our city administrator will go through his presentation. We'll be getting this one-on-one class. I'm sure this video will be watched by other boards and commissions and other interested residents and business owners to see what this is all about. But I'm really hoping to get some questions from you and some guidance tonight on advice that I can give to the council, some guiding principles on how we recover and reinvest. And from that, I will go to the council. I will lay out these guiding principles and get their feedback on it, and then I will come back with a more detailed plan. So we're really at the beginning of a multi-step process, and I'm not even assuming that I will be getting to council with a plan for approval till June. So we have a lot of conversations to go, and you guys just happen to be the fortunate group that gets the very first version of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to City Administrator Bachwitz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the task force. Before we start, there's some really good news we'd like to share, and that is that Mayor Pauley and the City of Sammamish, Issaquah Fire and Rescue, Issaquah Tribe announced today the opening of our east side mass vaccination facility. So congratulations to all of you. You are the ones poked and prodded to help make this happen. So we have worked on this diligently over the last several months. We are so excited with the partnership with the Snoqualmie Indian Tribe. They continue to get vaccine directly from the federal government, and they have decided to make that available to the larger community through our efforts. So thank you for your vision and your stick-to-itiveness to make all this happen. It's been a difficult road, as we are all aware. Vaccine has been hard to come by, perhaps a little bit easier now, but certainly over the last several months been hard to come by, and we're so happy that the Snoqualmie Tribe is partnered along with the Eastside Fire and the City of Sammamish to set up this vaccination site, which will open next week. People are interested, they can go. There's a Snoqualmie Tribe vaccine site available for signups, and people can get more information there. We're also working, actually Marisol, who's on our task force, part of her day job is to help us reach out to members of the community who may not have easy access to the vaccine. And so part of the allocation that we'll have will be reserved for those members of the community most in need. And so Marisol and a group of volunteers, as well as our colleagues in Sammamish, have been working diligently and will continue to work diligently for the foreseeable future, so that you know, we can make sure that everyone in our community has good access to the COVID-19 vaccine. So wanted to just share that, Mayor Pauley. Thank you for your leadership as well. It's been a hard road through all of the things we have learned 3 months ago that we didn't know about vaccines and issues associated with all that. But we're moving forward, and we're very excited that it was announced this afternoon. So I want to start with that. If there's any questions on that, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll get into the presentation. All right, let me share my screen. All right, can everybody see that? All right, great, thanks. So as Mayor Pauley said, myself and Beth Goldberg, our finance director, are going to try to kind of give an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act, the various components of it, and what it all means for Issaquah. We'll talk a little bit about the money that has been made available for state and local governments. We also want to spend a fair amount of time talking about the other key funding areas from the plan. So the money that the city of Issaquah is getting is important. We'll fund hopefully a lot of important projects, initiatives to help our community move forward. But there's also lots of other money in the plan that can help that we'll have access to either directly or through King County or through the state of Washington. So we want to talk a little bit about that. As we look toward moving forward, we want to review the investments we have already made over the last 12, 14 months in the pandemic and in helping the community. We want to talk a little bit about guiding principles. As the mayor said, her big goal here is not what specific projects or initiatives to fund, but first and foremost to think about the broader picture. And so we'll spend a little time talking about that. And then most important for this evening, to get your feedback and answer any additional questions that you have. So the act, as I think you all know, $1.9 trillion was signed into law by President Biden on March 11th. It provides a whole variety of different kinds of support, direct payments, extending unemployment insurance, expand and extend employment insurance. And Mayor Polly, I just saw, I'm not going to be able to easily see comments, so please interrupt me if there are questions along the way, because I don't know how to show the presentation and the comments at the same time. So,
so actually, sorry, City Administrator Bobkowitz, I meant to send that to all attendees, not you. I picked the wrong tab, so I will be watching for you.
Okay, great. I saw out of the corner of my eye a little pop-up, but I don't know how to get everything else on the screen, so I apologize for that. Again, $350 billion for state and local governments, economic development funds, housing funds, child care funds. So there's lots. 1.9 trillion even today is still a lot of money. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're going to start first at the $350 billion for state and local governments. So what does this mean for us? It means $8.6 million. We will not see a final dollar amount until the Treasury makes allocations, and in our case, we will see that money through the state of Washington. But what we have seen in the tables and lists from the National Local Government Associations have been pretty consistent at about $8.6 million. So that is the amount of money to invest in the community.
City Administrator, if I could just add one thing for context, I believe
Sure,
our annual budget last year was $130 million, correct?
All funds, yes.
All funds, okay.
So 60 days after enactment, so 60 days after March 11th is when the first payment needs to be made. It looks like this will come in 2 tranches. So the federal government, in our case, will need to give the state of Washington by May 11th funds, and then states will have 30 days distribute funds to what are known as non-entitlement communities. So without getting too much into the weeds here, cities throughout America get community development block grant money, or CDBG funds, and cities of size 50,000 or larger are entitlement communities, and so they will receive those funds directly from the federal government in that first 60 days. Smaller communities like Issaquah are known as non-entitlement communities under the CDBG rules, and so we will get it no later than 30 days later, so June the 11th. The fiscal recovery funds must remain available until December 31, 2024. Put a different way, they're also eligible to be spent by jurisdictions through December 31, 2024. What the money can be spent on. This is really important, and I'll spend a moment kind of reading through this. The first bullet, to respond to the public health emergency and its negative economic impact. So that includes assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. That's a pretty broad definition. My guess is that in the next 30 days, cities will see additional guidance and directions from the Treasury Department, and there will likely be additional direction even from Washington State, but that's a pretty broad definition. Second is to respond to workers performing essential work during the COVID-19 public health emergency by providing premium pay to eligible workers that are performing such essential work, or providing grants to eligible employers that have eligible workers who perform essential work. So one thing that we will be able to do potentially as a community is recoup some of the costs that we have had for providing that essential work, certainly the city, Eastside Fire and Rescue, but we also may have the opportunity to provide grants to other eligible employers that have been performing that work. We have another water district, for example, which does not have a direct funding mechanism of the Sammamish Plateau Water Agency, the hospitals, certainly Swedish Hospital. So there may be some opportunities for the city to make grants to other organizations that have paid those eligible workers. Next is for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue of such local government due to the COVID-19 public health emergency related to revenues collected in the most recent full fiscal year of the local government. And so we'll talk a little bit more, and Finance Director Beth Goldberg is with us this evening to get into a little bit of the detail. We have done that analysis looking at our revenues in fiscal 19 versus what our revenues were in fiscal 2020, and we have made some preliminary estimates as to what that reduction in revenue is. And so under these rules, we would be able to recover those lost revenues and then spend that money as the city sees fit. And then finally is to make necessary investments in 3 different kinds of specific infrastructure. Water and sewer, and certainly Issaquah is in both of those businesses, or broadband infrastructure. We do not have municipal broadband in Issaquah, but if there was a project that the community, the city council, the mayor wanted to pursue under the provisions of the act, we could. There are some specific ineligible uses for the fiscal recovery funds. The first one deals with the reduction in tax revenue for other reasons other than the reduction of revenue. So it's not something we have to worry about specifically here. To make sure that the revenue lost is year to year and other extenuating factors. And then second is that can have deposited into any pension fund. In discussion of the act in the Congress, there are some states, some communities that are having pension issues, and I think that there was a concern specifically that this money not be used to solve any pension problems unrelated to the pandemic. As far as justifiable uses of fiscal recovery funds, again, this restates this a little bit more about funding our lost revenue. Local governments can use the funding its own needs. Nonprofits, businesses, and organizations for eligible expenses. Again, water, sewer, and broadband. What does it mean to respond to negative economic impacts? I stole this presentation from the International City County Managers Association. So this is an interpretation they shared with city managers and city administrators around the country. First is that the clear intent is to provide broad and flexible investments. And again, a few industries, specifically tourism, travel, and hospitality, have been called out. So I think that's important to remember. The economic impacts test was a project, program, or organization harmed revenue-wise or otherwise by the economic slowdown. Again, as you'll hear from the finance director shortly, and that's something that I've already begun to look at. There may be some opportunities to receive additional funds from the state allocations. So the state of Washington is getting, I think it's a couple $2 billion through this act. So they will have the ability, if they so choose, to make that money available to local governments through the CARES Act funds last year. For example, Issaquah was not eligible directly for any CARES Act money, but the state of Washington decided to take some of its allocation and make that available. And then the third bullet here, localities may also transfer Recovery Act funds to other units of local government. And so it goes the other way as well. So the city of Issaquah has the ability to make money available to the county or to the state. In our case, Eastside Fire and Rescue would be another unit of local government. The Sammamish Plateau Water Agency, another unit of local government. So there's some flexibility there as well, if there are some regional opportunities. So that's sort of a broad overview, Mayor Pauley. That's sort of the end of the first part of this. Would you like me to continue, or would you like me to stop for a moment and see if there are any questions about that first part?
Thanks, Administrator. You didn't use a lot of acronyms, so I'm pretty sure it was fairly easy to understand, but let's just give it a second or two. If anybody has a question on the first part, if you just indicate that you have a question in the chat, then I'll get you on the screen, and I'm not seeing any right now.
All right.
I think you're good to continue. Thanks.
All right, then we're ready to move on. So the next part is to talk specifically about what's the order of magnitude we believe that the revenue losses are. And with us this evening from her vacation hideaway is Beth Goldberg, our finance director. Beth, are you there and can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I heard Joanne unmute me, so technology is working. Good evening, everyone. My name is Beth Goldberg. I'm the finance director, and we've done an initial analysis of the revenue loss that can be tied to COVID. You'll recall City Administrator Bobkowitz mentioning that one of the eligible criteria is to replace revenues lost as a result of COVID. And what this slide that I believe you're currently looking at shows is across all city funds, we have identified $2.8 million worth of revenue lost. And we did this by examining revenues for select revenue sources for, in 2020 relative to what we collected in 2019. In a moment, I'll go through the general fund details, but on this slide, I wanted to mention our Municipal Arts Fund, which the city uses to support arts programming around the city, was hit pretty hard because it derives most of its revenue from the admissions tax. And with theaters and both movie theaters and live performing theaters being shut down due to COVID, we had a significant amount of revenue loss. Basically, the $40,000 we collected in 2020 is representative of the first quarter of 2020 when things were open, and then after that, it basically dropped to zero. Similarly, with the lodging tax, this is a tax that is assessed on stays at local hotels and inns. With travel basically shut down last year, similar to the admissions tax, after the first quarter, we basically received no revenue from this source. And this is a source of revenue that the city uses to promote tourism and related economic development activities in the city. And then on a different level, the motor vehicle excise or fuel tax goes to the street operating fund. We've seen this revenue source recover in the waning months of 2020, but right after COVID hit and when people weren't traveling and purchasing as much gas, we saw this revenue source trail off. And then last, our utility funds. We've had some people struggle to pay their utility bills, and so we've had some revenue loss there. We are hopeful that once the pandemic passes, most of these people will be able to catch up on their payments, but there is an element of this that we will not get back, and that is penalties on late utility bills. The governor signed an executive order in 2020, I believe it was April of 2020, saying that utilities could not charge penalties. So we've had to write off about $148,000 worth of utility penalties, which is included in this amount. And then, City Administrator, if you could go to the next slide, I could speak to the general fund impacts.
It is on the screen.
Okay, excellent. So we've gone through and done an analysis of various general fund revenue sources, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, but what's listed on this slide are various general fund revenues that trailed off in 2020 as a result of COVID, and this ranges from everything from the utility tax on the unpaid utility bills that I mentioned on the previous slide to things like pull tabs, which are a gambling game played in bars. With bars closed, pull tab revenues dropped off. And then various court activities did not happen in other forms of public safety. So not as many traffic citations, for example, were issued. So we saw some drop off in revenue there. And then finally, our recreation classes. With our park system shut down, we experienced significant revenue loss for our park system, both for recreation classes and in rents and leases. So, for example, renting out Pickering Barn and things of that nature. In 2020, we also ceased providing passport services, and we had been collecting revenue on that. And then last, liquor control board profits. With bars closed, we are not deriving as much revenue from that source. So collectively, the general fund impact is $1.8 million. And one other thing that I'll mention before turning this back over to City Administrator Bobkowitz is that this analysis just looks at 2020. But as we know, things are still not operating at full capacity as through the first months of 2021. So depending on how the definition of the rescue money is interpreted, we may be able to identify additional revenue loss. And the Liquor Control Board profits is a good example of this. The governor announced recently that he's waiving the fees for liquor licenses for bars in 2021 if they purchased a license in 2020 in order to make things a little bit easier for bars and other restaurant establishments to come back post-COVID. So we are expecting in 2020 a fairly significant revenue hit from our liquor revenues, which are passed through from the state. So there is a possibility that these numbers that I've just mentioned are actually higher than what we have cited here. So with that, I'll pause and maybe see if there are any questions before turning it back over to City Administrator Bobkowitz.
Hey, Beth, this is the mayor. At this time, I'm not seeing any questions, but I'll give it a few seconds to see.
Mayor Polly, I'm showing Ron Fall has a question.
Oh, okay. Are you seeing it in the chat or hand raised? Because I'm not seeing it in the chat.
In the chat, but it was sent to me privately.
Ron. So everybody on the line on the chat, make sure you're picking all attendees or you're just going to send Joanne all of the messages. Ron, let's hear your question.
Thanks, Joanne. Yeah, it defaults to host. So I got a question about this new act that's coming out. Are you saying that of the COVID-related revenue loss and the general fund revenue loss, which together is about 4.6 million, the city of Issaquah is able to recuperate the full 4.6 million in losses?
Actually, and I've gone back to the first slide. It's 2.8 million, and so the 1.8 of the general fund was already included in the calculation.
Got it. Okay, I see that right there. So basically, the 2.8 million we're entitled to recuperate. So we would actually have a net neutral based on 2019 actuals.
That's correct. If the council and mayor so choose, we don't have to. We could spend that 6.8 million or 8.6 million rather on other allowable expenses. But I think clearly, I think our initial thought in the administration is that yes, we would want to recoup this as general revenue and then allocate it for perhaps things that are other municipal needs.
Can I add to that too, Wally? Because I know that we're talking with a great group of residents and business owners who don't sit through our very, very long budget processes. So I guess, Ron, to take it one step further, if we decided that one of the things to do was to put in funding to recoup those losses, it would mean we could also plan to spend it because it wasn't money we had in our wallet. So if the city, we're managing ourselves to the revenues that come in. And so that would mean a proposal to spend it on something.
Thank you for that clarification. I know that the two of you have been working very diligent to making sure that we don't go into deficit. And so I think hats off to the city for recognizing the situation we're in and preventing a catastrophic economic problem for us. But that's really good news that we would actually end up being able to recuperate, because that means we would break even, or not necessarily break even. We would actually we would end up having slush fund almost, because we haven't spent it.
Sort of. So if you think of it that you have your income coming in, it's $10 and you plan to spend $10. We only had $8 come in last year, so we only plan to spend $8, which means if we put another $2 in there, we could spend it on new things. So we're back up to 10. I think the interesting thing to think about this pot of money is that it's one-time money. They're not coming and giving us $8.6 million next year. So wherever those revenues used to come from, we're kind of hoping that over time they begin to ramp back up. So there's more admissions tax, lodging fund tax. And so we get ourselves back up to that $10 as the economy gets better.
And I realize every year our revenues are going to be plus or minus a few $100,000, but because we have already projected costs or commitments, like for instance, road improvement projects and things like that, and our leases for the city buildings and taxes and things of that sort. So we are not in deficit right now. Is that correct?
Yes. So, and actually I have to throw Beth in the pot here too. The reason we do what we do is because Beth makes us do it. Municipal governments have to balance our budget. So last year for 2020, we went into the reserve fund, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, City Administrator Bobkowitz grabbed $4 million to get through last year. So that means that we needed help last year, and what we planned for this year was that we would spend the $8 we knew we had, so we wouldn't have to go back into that reserve fund or savings account again. But now it looks like we have $10.
So we can actually replenish the reserve fund that we had, the rainy day fund, so to speak.
Another option is you keep your $2 and you don't spend it, and that's like putting it back in the savings account. Is that right, Beth?
Yeah. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know if I was on mute or not. Since I wasn't on mute, you may have heard my husband laugh in the background to your comment, Mayor, about me making you do things. Anyway, yes, we could use it to replenish the bank account, but one of the issues that the mayor and the council have been talking about, they talked about throughout the budget process last year, and I would imagine it's going to continue to be a discussion this year, is that through the city's proactive financial management, we actually have built up pre-COVID some healthy reserves, and 2020, hard to keep track of the years, 2020 actually ended up finishing a little bit better than we expected. So we actually, for revenues separate from the ones I'm talking about here. So we actually still have a healthy reserve, and the council, in adopting the 2020 budget, decided to spend down some of that reserve by about $5 million. And so getting this money from the federal government now, because we were so proactive last year in adjusting to our revenue reality, and then because things like sales tax performed strongly at the end of the year, we actually are in a very strong financial position right now, which then allows us to redeploy this money, this federal money, to needs in the community and put those dollars to immediate work. And I don't know if Mayor, City Administrator Bobkowitz, if you want to add anything to that.
No, again, thank you, Beth. I think there's going to be options that the council and the mayor are going to have to look at. And again, tonight's just the beginning of those discussions.
Thank you, City Administrator. And I do not see anything else in the chat. So if you want to keep moving through the slides, that'd be great.
Very good. So there are other resources for local government, and there's several slides here, and I'm not going to try to read every detail, but just to kind of give a broad brush of other resources that are included in the Act. Under transportation and infrastructure, there is community development for capital projects, there's transportation, there's infrastructure money from EPA and from FEMA. These slides talk more about that. Federal transit, I think, is important for us. Certainly, Sound Transit has taken a very large hit financially through the pandemic, and so there are opportunities for them to recoup some of those dollars, and I think that will be helpful to us as we continue to work with Sound Transit on the extension of light rail to Issaquah. Relief for airports, again, EPA, small business and nonprofit support. While Issaquah has done quite a bit in supporting those businesses, the federal government is also putting money in toward that. $3 billion for the Economic Adjustment Assistance Act money, $7.2 billion for Small Business Protection Program, $1.25 billion for shuttered operator venues grants. That's for stadiums and theaters. $28.6 billion in restaurant revitalization fund grants. Certainly, restaurants all over America have been hurt, so that's $28.6 billion that'll be available nationwide. Again, the National Endowment of the Arts, National Endowment of the Humanities, museum and library services, lots of money there to support a whole variety of organizations.
So Wally, before you move on to the next slide, for those that are listening and that might wonder those buckets aren't directly coming to the city, part of our plan will be to make sure we connect nonprofits, restaurants, and theaters, etc., to these federal resources as we are given direction on how to do it. So part of our plan will be to help make those connections and to plan for how we will spend our allocation.
Covered the Economic Adjustment Act, the modification to the Paycheck Protection Program, so PPP, many organizations, businesses took advantage of that, so there's additional dollars there. Making larger 501c3s organizations, veteran organizations, additional new services that do not employ more than 500 employees per physical location eligible for PPP. And then, again, that application deadline has already passed. $1.25 billion in shuttered operator venue grants, talked a little bit about that. Restaurant revitalization, community navigation pilot program to help, again, businesses with their finances, targeted disaster assistance loans, NEA, National Endowment of the Humanities. All this is in your packet, so I wanted to include it in the presentation so you had the details. But again, just really to give a sense of the breadth of funds that are available. Housing assistance, this has been an issue locally, nationally, and here you'll see there is nearly $30 billion in emergency assistance, emergency housing vouchers, low-income home emergency assistance programs. Again, this money will likely not come directly to us, as you can see here at the bottom of this slide, that the payments will be made directly to states, local governments with more than 200,000 residents, Indian tribes or tribally designated housing entities. So Issaquah residents would access these funds through larger levels of government, King County, Washington State, but that money is there and will be available to our residents through those organizations and the government agencies. Emergency housing vouchers, $5 billion. Again, will be available to our residents through other government agencies. Money for low-income home energy assistance program. Food security and public health, another focus Mayor Polly has had through the pandemic and her work with that. So there is much money available through this act for nutrition assistance, for COVID testing and tracing. The public health piece, of course, is extremely important. Community health centers, mental health, community-based funding for local substance use disorders, and money for community-based funding for local behavioral health needs. So lots of pots of money there that our residents will have access to through different levels of government. And I will not spend a lot of time on these slides. Again, happy to answer any questions if there are any. This gives you a sense of the breadth of all that. The Moving Forward Act, this is the infrastructure piece that is the next step of this. So that is an additional $1.5 trillion in addition to the $1.9 trillion that is now just being discussed in Washington for infrastructure. It's difficult to know how much will ultimately be approved, but hopefully there'll be some opportunities for Issaquah to access some of this $1.5 trillion as we move forward.
And Wally, if I can make a comment about that, this is the mayor again. Typically, the way cities and counties receive their money for projects is that the federal government will allocate it towards a regional planning authority, and ours is called the Puget Sound Regional Council. And then there is a criteria and a program set up so that it is spread equitably throughout the Puget Sound region and all of the 4 counties in the Puget Sound region. So those aren't funds that we would directly get, but we definitely have a possibility of submitting projects to a project selection team, and we could be awarded money from Puget Sound Regional Council.
Mayor Polly, that concludes the section on the other parts of the Act. If there's any questions, happy to take a pause to answer those on the other funding.
I am not seeing any questions right now, but let's wait a second and see. There's a lot of information there. A lot of it was more context about what all of the buckets are in the relief package, not necessarily the municipal one. I'm not seeing any, Wally, so I think you can continue.
Great. The next section of the presentation, we wanted to review the investments that Issaquah has already made to date. We've received 2 tranches of money from the state of Washington through the CARES Act, which was the bills that were passed last spring. And so much of what the city has spent, but not all of what the city has spent, has come from that CARES Act funding. Before there was a CARES Act, at the end of March last year, the City Council was very proactive and allocated $100,000 for rental assistance, and so that was done right out of the gate. We then had 2 disbursements of CARES dollars in both June and September. In that first allocation, we received $1.1 million, which was divided up through direct business assistance, reimbursements for our city services, and funds for human services agencies within Issaquah. We also, in that first allocation, received some additional dollars from King County, specifically for business assistance. In the second allocation in the fall, the city received $563,000 additional CARES Act money from the state of Washington. $250,000 was made again available for direct business assistance, $250,000 for human services agencies, and another $63,850 for reimbursements for city services. But then at the end of last year, as the council was considering its budget for 21, the council allocated an additional $500,000 for direct business assistance. That was from the fund balance, our savings, if you will. So that was allocated in November of last year. Also, money last summer was allocated to the Village Theater from the Arts Fund for $25,000. The Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, which is the group that oversees the allocation of lodging tax, they made $50,000 in grants to various tourist-serving organizations within Issaquah last fall, and then there is an additional tranche of money that's being considered by LTAC, the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, and so those recommendations will be coming to the council later this month. The council also, as part of the budget for 2021, allocated $55,000 for landlord-tenant mediation. There's been a lot of concern among the mayor and the council regarding the eviction moratorium and what happens when that is lifted. And so that $55,000 was allocated to help perhaps landlords and tenants come to some agreement on overdue rent that will ultimately come due. Also, at the beginning of this year, the council made 3 additional allocations at the recommendation of this task force. The first was $45,000 for emergency housing assistance. That is for individuals really with nowhere else to go. And we have already made some of the expenditures out of that. We'll come back to the council, I think, in the month of May with an update on how that money has been allocated. The council also authorized an additional $250,000 in small business grants in February, and then the $45,000 for the Fit and Fun Outdoors initiative. We're purchasing equipment now and hope to have the first of that equipment out here in the next 45 or 60 days. Greenery last summer was an investment, which we certainly count. The city financed the costs of the barricades and other infrastructure that was needed while the streetery was managed by downtown Issaquah. The city did make that investment in the traffic issues and certainly had staff that helped with that. The Issaquah Loyal Buy Local campaign was something that the city launched last spring, and we continue to use that logo and that campaign in a variety of different ways. And then finally, the Vaccine Community Partnership. Mayor Pauley called together our community partners in January to start working on what now will be our mass vaccination site, but we've also been working closely with EFR on mobile vaccinations since January. There is a cost associated with this. There's a three-party agreement between the city of Issaquah, the city of Sammamish, and Eastside Fire and Rescue to pay up front the costs associated with all of this. And so that is an expense that we have not spent very much money on it thus far, but we had to pay with Sammamish the costs of setting up that mass vaccination site. We expect to get reimbursed 100% for all those costs, but the cities of Issaquah and Sammamish are fronting the money to make that all happen. So, Mayor, that concludes the section regarding the investments the city has made to this point. If there's any questions, happy to stop.
That's great, City Administrator. So you've all had your America Recovery Act 101 primer and a little bit of a peek into city financing and how we did last year and how we're doing this year. So this is where I'd like to have sort of the conversational piece about, as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of needs. There's a lot of buckets that the needs get funded from, and then cities have this bucket of money. And so there are many, many things that different ways we can divide it up. And I would love to hear from the group here about where you think we should be paying our bills, making investments, and if so, what kinds of investments.
And so with that, Mayor, I have just a few final slides.
Okay, let's go through your slides. That's great. Thanks.
To further kind of set the stage on the moving forward piece. And it really, you know, from Mayor Pauley's perspective, is the strategic plan that was adopted in May 2019. The community spent quite a bit of time, you know, kind of reflecting on itself and reflecting on next steps. And I think it's Mayor Pauley's desire to kind of use this as a framework for those discussions. You know, this slide kind of shows you the mission, vision, guiding principles, and goals. But really, I think the two pieces of this that probably make the most sense to reflect on as we talk about how this money should be invested are the guiding principles and the goals. So the guiding principles of the strategic plan really are guiding principles for the community, and that is how we focus on people, how we focus on the environment, community prosperity, service excellence, and equity. The council is spending a lot of time through its police accountability, human services, and equity action plan, looking at equity issues, looking at how things are funded through an equity lens. And I know that Mayor Pauley feels very strongly, you know, that as we look towards sort of guiding principles for the spending of this money, looking at the guiding principles of the strategic plan and its focus on equity is a very important piece to that. The City Council goals, many of you were involved in the process, so you're familiar with the goals, but they are mobility, how we get the people around our community, how we get people to places that they need to go for work or for leisure. We have made beginnings of investments. There's a lot more investments out there that need to be done. Growth and development, how we continue to make land use decisions for how Issaquah grows in the future. Environmental stewardship, through Mayor Pauley's leadership, the community, the council, city has been very much a leader in investing and purchasing lands to be protected, other programs and services. Social and economic vitality, the issue of human services and helping those less fortunate, really been a hallmark of the work that the city has done through the pandemic. That's work that is new. We're continuing to spend new dollars on that and how that continues. And then certainly the economic vitality of the community, making sure that people can work here, shop here, do business here, fortunate with the investments that Costco continues to make, fortunate that we've heard recently that REI is locating its corporate headquarters as it kind of reimagines how it does business. That's certainly great, but probably the biggest new business to come to Issaquah through the pandemic are all the employees of all the other companies in the region who are working at home. And so we have added hundreds, if not thousands of workers to our community that live here, slept here, recreated here with their families, but they now work here. And so that is a piece of a puzzle, and what can we do to continue to support that as we move forward, because certainly people will continue to work from home as we move forward. City leadership and services, in the strategic plan, this includes police and fire, as well as how we reach out to the community. And so certainly those are things that we work on. And then finally, infrastructure. A lot of this money, all this money really is one-time money, and many infrastructure projects are one-time expenses. So as we look at how this Recovery Act dollars are spent, investments in infrastructure could make a lot of sense because, again, in many cases, those are one-time expenses. When you look at the categories for spending, the negative economic impacts, I think we've talked about the workers performing essential work. I think we've highlighted that there are agencies outside of the city that aren't getting these funds, Eastside Fire and Rescue, Swedish Hospital, Issaquah, the Smash Plateau Water Agency, the water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. But another thought, it would be how we can leverage this funding with other jurisdictions. Are there sewer projects with the city of Sammamish? Are there water projects? Are there things we can do with King County? They're all getting money too. And are there opportunities to partner with some of our neighboring jurisdictions on how to make those investments? So, Madam Mayor, members of the task force, as the Mayor said, we're looking for your feedback tonight, really on guiding principles, sort of the 30,000 feet take on this as we begin this discussion with the community. The next stop will be a discussion with the City Council on Monday, April 26th. We will share the feedback with the City Council from this evening's discussions. We will then, I think, come back to you. We'll continue to have monthly meetings for a while more about additional community engagement that might be necessary to get feedback on potential next steps. And then, as the Mayor mentioned, hope to have the City Council making some final decisions at the end of June. Madam Mayor, I'm going to take the presentation down, and again, happy to have any questions that you may have.
That sounds awesome. Thank you for that presentation. You did an excellent job of, I think, giving us some broad context about what the Act is about and some specific context about what the dollars that are coming to cities can be spent on. There are no right or wrong answers tonight. There are no right or wrong ideas. This is about putting everything on the table, and Joanne is keeping notes for us on what we're hearing so that we can present it back to the council. So I'd really love to just do a round robin. I'm not seeing any questions coming up, so I'm wondering if we're just ready to move into comments and thoughts and suggestions. We do have guests here with us this evening at our Issaquah Recovery Task Force, and so everybody, we'll go right around the room and make sure everybody has a chance. If somebody has a question on something that somebody's talking about, just let me know in the chat that you'd like me to give you an opportunity to ask a question. And otherwise, we're just going to sit and listen for the next half hour and see what brilliant ideas you all come up with. So I'm going to pick a volunteer. Where is he? Oh, I got a volunteer. Marlene's right there. Awesome. You want to start? Let's start.
I figure I can try. Can you hear me now? I had trouble before.
You can. Good.
Wonderful.
Good job.
Okay, phew. I don't know. I use like 3 different ones at work, so this is the 4th one today. So it gave me a little trouble. But I appreciate all of the work that the city did to sort of maintain its budget and be really diligent as we went through. And so I'm sure I speak for the rest of the council when I say I just appreciate all of the hard work, tough choices, and stick-to-itiveness that everybody had through this. So I appreciate that. A couple of comments as it relates to guiding principles. I appreciated the thinking back to what is the evolved strategic plan. So continuing to use that great work that was already kind of gone through a lot of the processes already. So to make sure we look at that but to also think about how that might evolve based on what we learned over the last year. Something that Wally mentioned was really around how do we become a place where we have more workers here than we used to as people are working from home? And what might that mean to the future to be a community of choice? And so for me, when I think about that, I think about where might we want to invest in things that are a strategic advantage. Some of you who know I support the park board, so I always think about our great outdoors as a great place to think about what would make people want to live here and be able to work from home and then get outside. So I think for me, thinking about that strategic advantage and sort of putting back on the table some of the things from the parks strategic plan that got shelved. So throw that out there as a guiding principle just to double down in the outdoors and our environment. Also on the social and economic vitality pillar, curious about a couple things. One is it relates to sort of the additional support for nutrition assistance. I know through the Issaquah School District, they've really allowed more people to get food and assistance than maybe previously. And so I would just wonder if we could partner to see if that's continuing or if that's something that we would need to supplement if that funding dries up for the school district, because I think that's been great for the community to have a broader range of support and how to get that nutrition assistance. Also taking a look at schoolhouse rec or a tutoring program as we start thinking about kids coming back to school. Parts of our community maybe further behind than others as we go back into next year. So thinking about, is there potentially a way to subsidize or sort of beef up sort of the potential tutoring or sort of aspect of the community? I know a lot of people have been doing it sort of ad hoc, but it would be nice to see how we can support our kids and families as they get back to a new normal. So I think those are some of the things. I appreciated all of the information today, but really thinking about, for me, my priorities would be around sort of that social economic vitality pillar, as well as really thinking about that environment and outdoors, both to set us up for sort of what we're coming out of and the help that people will need, but then also looking to our future to really think about how we continue to double down on what makes Issaquah great.
Wow, Marlene, that was great. I am not seeing any hand raised in the chat, but Jason, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and what a great comment to follow. Thank you, Marlene. That was fantastic. So, as far as guiding principles, I think one probably everybody, I would imagine, probably pretty comfortable with would be making our government whole again. And the 2.8 that we see we've spent, and it really only covers till February 2021, so we're still coming out of the pandemic. But if you take that 2.8 and you figure it out, it's about 33% of that 8.6 million. So I think it's appropriate to, again, make our city whole. I'm proud to hear how fiscally responsible we've been. It speaks to how great our city is, how great our leaders have done. But making that whole, because again, if we were able to handle a pandemic that well, that's fantastic. But I think we should put the money back, at least that 33%, and then possibly even think about keeping a small amount for what still is going to be the rest of 2021. I was telling someone the other day, as hopeful as 2021 has been, it's still kind of the annoying sibling to 2020. We're not quite out of it yet. So keeping a little bit of money aside for that. As far as suggestions for guiding principles, I think Marlene made a great point about tutoring. I hadn't even thought about that. But we want our kids hopefully to remember this as little as possible and not have these challenges chase them for the next 10 to 15 years. So if there is something to do with the tutoring or helping our Issaquah school districts, I think that would be fantastic. As far as the outdoors, love that idea as well. Thinking also about how we might be able to advertise and market a little bit more, because I'm sure there's going to be competition once people start moving around again. So maybe even having an advertising marketing campaign that's not so much local as it is regional, trying to see our city come back to life again. So I think that would be appropriate. I think the buy local campaign, keeping the street around and healthy, I think those are great as well. So again, I know this is just the first touch and we're just kind of going over it. It was a lot of information, and thank you, Administrator Bobkowitz. That was a great presentation. So I know we'll all have more comments, but that's probably where I'd start, is trying to make our government whole again through, again, fiscal responsibility, through no fault of their own. Happy we were able to do it, but taking care of that, and then a few of the other things that I had mentioned. So thank you.
Jason, that's great. And I know that some of you will think about it tonight when you're going to sleep and dream up some other things. So don't be shy about emailing in thoughts that you have after we finish tonight, because a lot of good ideas already. Do I have a volunteer for next up? One of our guests want to go? Oh, look, both of my guests did not put their hand up, but Kathy's nodding her head. So we're going to head to Kathy McCrory. And Kathy, if you can introduce yourself to the group. I know you have come and spoken here before, but just a quick intro.
That's okay. Thank you. I'm Kathy McCrory. I'm the CEO at the Chamber of Commerce, and I was madly trying to find my hand button. So I'm glad that we were on video and I could nod. I did start out madly writing down questions as Wally began his presentation. And Wally, excellent job. Most of my questions were answered by the end of the presentation. I think the federal support that's coming to our states and to other organizations is extremely encouraging, because I think that it gives the city the opportunity to really, truly concentrate on that economic recovery piece that we will need. And my thoughts go to, as we recover, so do all of the surrounding communities. They're all getting pieces of the Federal Recovery Act dollars, and they're all looking at their investments. And I think we should, as Jason mentioned, look for those opportunities to work with our partners. Wally had mentioned it as well. I think infrastructure is going to be extremely important. We have the water issues that we have, and the recovery mentioned water, and I think there's some treatment possibilities that we were looking at before COVID. We cannot live without water. And so I think, a basic essential in life would be important to think of. I also know that Bellevue is planning a tremendous amount of growth the next 5 years. They're planning to more than double their commercial space. I have been keeping count, along with the Economic Development Department at the city, of businesses that we lost in 2020. And what's interesting to me is that we've lost almost an equal amount of businesses to COVID as we have businesses relocating to Bellevue. And I think we're going to need to look at our competitive edge, because again, as we get this money, so do our surrounding communities. And what are they doing to create those jobs, to get people to live, play, and work in their community? And yes, we have those home-based, but what I know about all of our people working from home right now is they're extremely innovative, and they're also starting businesses at home. And those businesses grow up and they look for places to move to eventually, to add employees, etc. And so I just think that the other part of infrastructure is having a great broadband, great connectivity, with everybody being online. And I'll just use where I work as an example. When we're hosting our big summits and we're using a lot of broadband, we're not in our offices, because our office doesn't have the connectivity capability on Gilman Boulevard. So we're all working from home, and that will probably continue because we need that greater broadband to compete. And the last thing I will say with infrastructure and what else can we do is, I know that jobs in the retail sector remain strong in Issaquah. The businesses we've lost there, our commercial property owners of the shopping centers are telling us they have no vacancies, but those are lower wage jobs. So I'm thinking about higher wage jobs, and how do we keep those, and how do we grow those, and how do we bring those companies into the area? And I think we need to look somehow at revitalization of some of our existing commercial space. And I know that's challenging, and what kind of incentives can we offer? Washington has very strict guidelines with that. But if there's some creative way out there that the city can think of to push some dollars towards reinvesting in those commercial properties, so that they become more competitive with Bellevue and Redmond and Kirkland and those developing areas, I think that would be important to us as well. So that's it for me off the top of my head. Thank you. And thank you for the great job you're all doing. It's just been tremendous.
Thank you, Kathy. I saw a couple other hands go up earlier. Was it Mike or Marisol? One of you guys had your hands up. Oh, let's go to Mike and then we'll go to Marisol.
Great, thank you, Mayor Polly. So just a few questions or comments, and a lot of really good comments so far that I totally agree with. But I guess the first point, and it's already been made a bit, and that is there are a lot of sources of funding that will be coming into the community, and I think it's going to be really important to make sure we're staying in touch with those other agencies, other cities, the county, the state, nonprofits that will be receiving funding through the different kind of funnels that are coming from the stimulus package, the recovery package, because we want to make sure we're not missing something by, thinking they're getting funding someplace else, but they're not, or overfunding something as a result of them receiving support from multiple sources. So I think that coordination to maximize the benefit of the monies, I think, will be really important. I think this idea of re-energizing Issaquah is kind of the theme that I'm hearing, this getting people reconnected, out and reconnected, and how can we target some investments that really start to do that. I saw a survey, a community survey that was done by one of the local cities, and one of the things that they heard from their residents was there's a huge amount of concern about the mental health impact that this is all having, because people have been so separated and disconnected from friends and just being together. And I think anything that we can do to re-energize that and reconnect people would be, I think, a big help. So the things that have been done even during the pandemic, bringing people together in outdoor activities, sponsoring community events, the streetery, all of those things I think were really instrumental in trying to reconnect people. But I think we got to do more there and do it in a way that makes people feel comfortable because they're in a safe and healthy environment. Local business certainly is a huge part of I think the image and the appeal of the city, and they struggled through this, obviously, and some of them are still on the edge. So things that we can do to support those local businesses with additional grants or sponsoring for them, community events or things that bring people together. The Issaquah Loyal program was, I think, a great success, and the branding was great. You see that all around town, and I think that we should continue that. And then the investment in the arts. The arts have been pretty much shut down, and as things start to open up again, it's another opportunity to bring people back together and find some investments that could be made there. As far as the long term, I think there are some infrastructure investments. Absolutely. I think we also need to be thinking about how is the community going to change from this. And City Administrator Bobkowitz mentioned that we have a number of people who are working from home, and there will be a trend that sticks. Not everybody's going to stay at home working, but we're going to see a lot more teleworking than ever before. So what does that mean to the community, and how do we support that operation, so to speak, in our neighborhoods, and even with our businesses that have people that are both telecommuting and working in the city? I think there's actually great opportunity. This funding, even though it is one time, I think can make a big difference in the near term, but also set the path for the long term. And so just one more quick comment as far as, kind of filling the gaps for the city of Issaquah and the programs that had to be reduced, or the money that had to be spent to respond to the impact from the pandemic. I think we need to find a way to close the gaps, but we should also think about, as we're going to, since this is one-time money, we need to think about, well, we're going to spend one-time money, but if we're going to start adding or expanding programs, those need to be the programs that live on. And so the new funding, as the economic recovery kind of takes hold, would need to be able to support those programs ongoing. So it's kind of thinking about rethinking the city services particularly around economic development, and some of the parks and community services functions may need to have maybe a little bit more of a boost as we look forward for that kind of resiliency and sustainability. So I think there's, again, a lot of opportunity here for some targeted investments, but it's absolutely going to require coordination between multiple agencies that have money to spend to make sure it's being spent and gaining the best benefit. So,
Thank you, Mike. That's excellent. As much as I am absolutely overwhelmed at the amount of money and the amount of pots of money that the feds have put out, and that they're making such a huge investment, it's hard. It's going to be hard to really track what we're doing with all the other stuff that's going around. I mean, we're lucky we have groups of mayors and associations, professional associations, where we can meet and kind of get the bigger story told. But yeah, it's going to be tricky. It's going to be very tricky. So thank you for that. I was going to go to Marisol and then Christy. You're good tonight? Awesome. Maybe Connie then. After Connie, you have comments, I'm going to go to Marisol first, and then I'll go to Shashi after that. Marisol.
Thank you, Mayor Polly. And thank you very much for that great presentation. That was a lot of information, a lot of great information. And thank you to all the other members of this task force for the great ideas. I feel like, you know, there is a lot of work that it has been already given. So thank you for sharing all these ideas. My only comment, and it's just adding to all the things that has already been said, which I think will be great. We need to keep our residents outside. We have found that we like to be outside. Even, I mean, for someone like myself who didn't grow up in this climate, I have learned to enjoy it. And I have to say that I have been to many places that I have never been before. You know, like every time I'm outside, I'm like, wow, to think about that, you know, in the winter, I never do this. So just think about the awesome trails that we already have and how we can bring people to enjoy them more. I was talking to a friend of mine who is also a resident here, and he was telling me about this great place for mountain biking in, I believe it's Tiger Mountain. And there is not an easy access for people. And, you know, just to have another place where people from other places can come and visit there. And, you know, say Issaquah is greatly known because of its great outdoors. So, yeah. I think
Marisol, that's awesome. Until you said it, I didn't realize how many different outdoor places I've been this winter, and I've lived here forever.
Yeah.
What a great point. That's fantastic. Okay, so let me check in with Connie, and then I'll go to Shashi. Connie, did you want to make some comments?
Yeah, I can make some comments, but I don't have video today, so I'm assuming you can hear me. Nod yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm thinking on a higher level because I thought you were asking us to try to figure out pots. And as I was wandering the dog park today, it was hard to create pots of money that a community could absorb and then decide where they wanted to spend their money. And Corey vehemently lectured me for a half an hour on the city needs to say where it would spend its money because it knows where its deficits are. And that would help with the conversation if they would propose what they want to do with the money. So if you want broadband, say broadband. Don't hint at broadband, right? And so then people could say yes or no. Do we want it to go to the water fund so that we could start doing our blending and not have it come off the community's utility rates? If you want to do that, say it. Now, what to do with all the rest? It is like you need to create pools of money because this is one-time spending, right? It's not like you're going to get this all the time. So you can't start creating programs that people expect to continue on into the future unless you have a dedicated revenue stream for that will support it. So it seems like you have to create a granting pool that would, you would ask for the criteria that people would show how big of a hole they got into for that area, because this whole thing is to backfill people's freak out deficits, right? This is it. Or two, to create a future work pool. So if you could show that, man, you just about died during this, it was so awful. Or two, if you had a little input of money, you could bring the city so much stuff and the community so much stuff, and then you would be given money to do those things. Now, using the strategic plan is sort of interesting. We are supposed to have metrics where we can show our deficits in the strategic plan and then look at our deficits and take us to a solution for those deficits. And that would be one mechanism for identifying pathways to invest in, because you use the word investment, and that means a return on investment. That means you look at short-term, long-term, and so I'm just trying to raise the conversation to a slightly different level. Of course, I love parks. Yes, I want broadband. I think the school district may have a funding source of its own, though I did not hear Wally say anything about school fund sources. So for me, that's a question. Are they going to be getting a pot of money of their own to solve some of the, like, the food issues, right? So if you were to go out to the public, I would say what the city feels its biggest deficits are. And I'm going to add one extra thing. You all went far down on your staffing, which made things like parks maintenance fall away. I don't know where we are on staffing anymore, and I don't understand what of this money could go just into the general fund. How do I phrase this better? Can our deficit staffing be considered a city loss that you need to refill, right? Right now, Beth came out with a 2.8 million or whatever that was, but really it's only 2.8 million because we reduced our staff to the point of pain. So is that really the amount of money, or can that be a larger number? I don't know the answer to that question. So I'm going to stop because I'm getting a puzzled look on some people's faces. But anyway, thanks for letting me talk.
Thanks, Connie. And I'm just going to check in with the group. There are 4 more people that I would like to give equal opportunity to, and that probably will make us go like about 10 minutes late before we close. So just want to make sure it's okay with everybody. Nobody has to jump off right at 8:30. Okay, great. So let's go to Shashi, and then we'll go to Trish.
Thank you, Mayor Polly, and thank you, Wally Bob Chris. Very good presentation, very elaborative. Yeah, lots to assimilate. Well, we know only about this pandemic because it happened in our lifetime and very significantly at very large scale. But in last 100 years, there had been 3 more in between. We don't speak about. So in 1918, of course, we had the biggest one, 50 million deaths. I've got it written because I can't remember myself. 1957, 2 million deaths. 68, 1 million deaths. And 2009, 152,000 deaths. And now we have 2.73 million deaths and more than 500,000 in America, in USA. So this had been very large scale. So I think and there were a lot of things which were not available during those pandemics. And the biggest thing which was not available those days was the being digital, having electronics. And I think that's the biggest place where we should invest more, because it's going to be more and more digital world now. And a lot of people started working from home and realized it took a pandemic to teach us that digital is more important and how much money we can save in maintaining those huge buildings. I went to Microsoft building for my shot, and I was amazed to see what it is like, how much money has been invested. Maybe a lot of stomachs would have been fed also. Anyway, so digital number one, I think. A second is urban mobility, transportation. People need to get together. They have to come together. So we'll have to build up more roads. And to do that, and then comes the density of our city. It is going to increase after pandemic. More jobs will be created in cities, urban areas, rather than rural or suburban. So we have to be a little bit like an octopus here. So like some cities have no scope of expanding at all. They have no space around it. I think we have, I'm not very sure, but if we have, we might take more land and try to build more infrastructure, to build more businesses, and to bring in more money, and to get back slowly, and also have collaborative programs with other cities and around us, and of course rethink about urban development. Even the real estate might change because a lot of people will work from home, so the design of the homes will change. There'll be cubicles. They could be temporary cubicle, move-in cubicle, permanent cubicles. So it won't be like one bedroom, or say 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. It will be how many office spaces to required. This is my thought. This particular thought is only mine. A lot of things, and then of course the jobs have increased after every pandemic in cities. So I'm sure it will come back. I'm sure we will come back to absolute normal. But for some time, when we say life after COVID, for a few years, the life will be with COVID. It's not going to go away so soon because we have done huge mistake. And that mistake is not locking it completely in the beginning itself. So we allowed this virus to mutate. And now it's not only mutating in one gene section, it's mutating in 2 places. In India, it happened. And that mutation has been now noticed in San Francisco. See, because people are traveling, and there had been no stoppage to that. And so I think there could be more and more mutations, could be worse, could be better. If a better one comes, which becomes very infectious but not deadly, we accept it. We would welcome that. So, and already bats are sitting with lots of reservoir to give out more. And not only bats, many other animals might be doing it. So I think we will have to rethink the whole thing. But yeah, digital mobility, mental health issues, and a lot of people being at home. A video chat like now, I'm talking to you. For me, it's almost same as, it's not 100% same as sitting in one room and talking, but I'm able to communicate. And I found that I have communicated much more on my video chats with my family all across the world, wherever they live, than I ever did earlier. And they say psychologically, it's socially similarly healthy. So that's my thought. And I had a lot of things to say, but anyway, so far I'll stop here. And thank you very much for listening.
Shashi, that was great. My high school class found me, which was super rare because I haven't seen them in 25 years. But you're right. We're going to live with the pandemic for a while, which is part of our recovery plan. It's not like it's gone now and we're working on just economic recovery. You're spot on. We're going to be living with this for a while. And then in 3 or 4 years, it may look different again. So we don't really know. So that's great. Thank you. I'm going to go to Trish and then Pavel.
You know what? I'm enjoying all this input. I'm taking it all in, and I'm probably going to email later. So thank you for the opportunity to talk.
That is great. Thank you, Trish. Pavel and then Ron.
All right. I'll be just short. It's a lot of information, and I kind of agree with Connie's comment that we need more concrete data in the plan, not just general, but I'm sure it's going to take a lot of work until Wally and his team will get to that point. I just want to mention one thing about the infrastructure. The biggest issue that we had when the pandemic hit is certainly we realized we don't have enough gloves, we don't have enough masks, disposal gowns, etc. And I think a lot of businesses don't have it. Like my family as a childcare owner, we didn't have that issue because all childcare schools have to have emergency supplies for everything. I think, I don't know if city can pass some sort of ordinance or something, but request that all businesses will have a emergency supply some sort, and maybe they can apply for some kind of a grant to build a storage for it or something. So, and part of that money can be used towards creating something like that. Because I'm sure this is not the last time we are hit with the viruses of unknown origin.
I agree with you, Pavel. That is great. Thank you. I'm going to actually have Wally talk at the end too about what we're going to do with this information and when we will come back out with a plan. It's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. Do you lay out a plan and go through the plan, or do you have an open conversation and come back with a draft plan? So I'll let him finish up on the end. I'm going to go to Ron, and then I know we have a caller, Robin, who also might like to make some comments this evening. So Ron.
Hi, thank you, Madam Mayor. So City Administrator Bob Quitz, fantastic presentation. I think that was really awesome. I enjoyed listening to that, and it was very positive. So we've got some great information there, and it's nice to hear that we've also got some good money. To Connie's point, and I agree with Pavel, and also Jason and Marlene's brought up some really good information there about the outdoors and businesses. Kathy McCory brought up some great information about giving boost to the businesses and making us a not necessarily just a sustainable, but get our businesses up and running and competing with some of the other cities, because I think that's important too. The money we put into our businesses is going to pay back through the taxes. I also want to be cautious about how we spend the money and spending all of it. I think we should keep some of it on reserves, because I worry that we're not out of this pandemic. And what if we get hit with another pandemic? Now, I don't want to play what if scenarios, but I think having some money on reserves will enable us to be able to keep all of our values and these programs that we want to push forward. To Kathy's point, she wants to have a boost to the businesses. That's great. But if we end up going into another pandemic or another lockdown because a variant comes out that is more lethal or hyper contagious, then we've got the money to be able to put into those programs to keep them sustaining, so we don't backtrack. And I think I don't want to lose progress, but if we have one-time spend money, let's make sure that whatever we do moving forward, we have the resources to keep us going forward if something should happen in a worst case scenario. So I just don't want to get caught unprepared. And we were totally unprepared for this pandemic. No one thought we were going to have, everyone who's been talking about a pandemic for years and years, but we didn't think we'd actually have one now. So I just want to be cautiously optimistic. And I think all the feedback I've heard is great. It's positive. I want to move forward, but I don't want to, I'm gun shy to spend it all. So
Ron,
thank you very much. We appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you very much. We do have to be, and I think Shashi touched on this as well, we do have to be cautious, and we do have to be ready for a setback, even though we're hoping we don't have a setback. So thank you for that. That was great. And I'm wondering, Joanne, if you are able to take Robin Buchers off of mute so he can make some comments.
Robin, you are off mute if you would like to make any comments.
Can I be, am I heard? Can you hear me now?
Robin, we can hear you perfectly well. Thank you for joining us tonight.
No, thank you. So my thoughts are just two or three. Number one, I just want to emphasize or reinforce what's already been said. These are one-time funds. And I've heard a lot of interesting ideas about creating ongoing programs. And my concern, just from a financial perspective, is that trying to match one-time funds with programs that are set up for longer than a short period of time and create expectations is a dangerous thing to do. Number two, I'm always trying in the financial world, in any event, trying to lever money. And Wally had commented that there are other agencies and jurisdictions that we might be able to lever these funds with. So I'm very interested as a sort of a community participant in this and hearing more about how we take $8 million and lever it with other entities and make it 80 million. Because in my mind, $8 million sounds like a lot of money, but in fact, I don't think it is, given the needs we have. So those two thoughts, and the last one I'll have is the one that jumps out at me most is infrastructure, in particular broadband. It's already been commented, and I don't need to beat on that drum again. But I think that somewhere in the mix, it fits in with your strategic planning as one of those aspirations. It's one-time kind of costs, expenditures, and one-time funding. And to me, the benefits of having, let's say, a wider broadband or more robust broadband infrastructure in this city will have benefits extending well into the future. That's my view. So those three thoughts. How do we lever? These are one-time costs, and I would emphasize the infrastructure, in particular broadband, as one that I think should be in whatever mix comes out of all these discussions. So thank you very much.
Robin, thank you for joining us this evening. I had a checklist. I think I got through everybody. Raise your hand if I missed you. And if we have everybody that wanted to comment, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to City Administrator Bobkowitz to give us some closing thoughts and talk about, I think, meeting frequency was one of the last things that we had on our agenda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, members of the task force. I think this was exactly the kind of conversation we were hoping to have. Certainly, this is not the only conversation, and we will be back to talk more specifics once we have them. So I think that does lead us to the question of next meetings. We've been meeting the second week of the month. The City Council is going to meet late in April to have an initial discussion. So if we were to have a meeting at our regular time on May 13th, I think we would have some better ideas of next steps at that point. So Madam Mayor, perhaps that's just something we should just plan on. I think we will also want to double back on a couple of other topics that have been important to the task force. At that point, our mass vaccination site will have been up for a while. So I think it would be good to have Eastside Fire and Rescue come and provide an update on that. There's a few other matters. The fun outdoor initiative should be well underway as well. So, Madam Mayor, maybe we plan on May 13th. You know, I'm hopeful that by the June 10th meeting, maybe there's some specific proposals to respond to, and then maybe we take a hiatus through the summer, and then either wrap things up as the fall dawns on us, or you know, continue to the end of the year. So if the group would agree, we'll go ahead and meet again at our regular time at 4 o'clock on Thursday, May the 13th, and we'll give you updates as to the progress on this funding, as well as other pieces that we've been dealing with in the pandemic. Does that make sense, Madam Mayor?
I think that sounds great, and I just want to let the group tonight, I've already had my first email from a viewer tonight with their thoughts adding into the conversation, which is just great. It's Mel Morgan, if you don't know him, but he's been a longtime friend and a great advocate for the city. I think the plan makes sense, Wally. I guess the last thing I'd like to close with tonight is I just want everybody to know this is a very unique opportunity. I recognize that. I'm not in any rush to come up with a plan and get it approved and spend the money. I want a great plan. I want one that addresses the emergency that we're in. Hang on one second. Hey, you guys in the kitchen. You guys in the kitchen. Oh my gosh, does everybody else like hate working at home like me? Oh man. Okay, goodbye. Told them I was going to come back on, and there they are. Okay, so we need a good plan that deals with, we need to take care, we're still in an emergency. I heard about that. I've heard about vaccines and all that. But we have, time to figure this out. This is a really great opportunity, and it can be something amazing. So I'm not in a rush. Just so everybody knows, I want a really, really good plan. Sorry for yelling, but they're always doing this to me, like always. So Wally, I think that's a good plan.
All right, Madam Mayor. So we will, Joanne will send out a reminder, and we'll get minutes put together. Again, the council will be talking about this on Monday, April 26th at a special meeting. So we encourage you to tune in. We'll summarize the comments then. Unless there's any other questions, Madam Mayor, I think we're ready to adjourn.
We're ready to adjourn, and it's 8:37, so we didn't do too bad. And as always, it was inspiring. Thank you for adding an extra meeting. Thank you for being so thoughtful and creative when you come. So have a good night, everyone.
Awesome meeting. Take care, y'all.